For a long time, I made bread that was really, really bad and looked more like a pita than a loaf of bread. Over time though, I realized that really good bread was just a combination of proper dough development and proper fermentation. And in this video, I'm going to show you my stripped down, simple method for mixing, kneading, and baking the bread that I make for my family every single week. This is my lazy loaf. Your starter is the crown jewel of the home-baked sourdough. It needs to be healthy, strong, and my rule of thumb is to have 3 days of regular, consistent feedings before I bake. So this is the night before. I feed it with around 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water before I go to bed. That way the starter is still very active in the morning, but hasn't become overly acidic. Lots of people say to use your starter pretty young, like 4 to 5 hours after feeding, but that's kind of a hard schedule when you have, a life. This loaf is going to be 500 grams of flour, with 60% bread flour and 40% whole wheat. So 300 grams of bread flour into your mixing bowl, then 200 grams of whole wheat. This is my sweet spot for an open crumb, even with a lot of whole wheat. Whisk that together, then set it aside. Next, we're adding 385 grams of water into a bowl. And if you're a little over like this, then just grab a paper towel and use it to dab up a few grams. It's much easier than trying to dump it or spoon it out. Then to this, add your starter. I aim for somewhere around 65 to 70 grams, and if you're significantly over, just reach on in and pull some out. Give that a good mixy mix so your starter dissolves, and then into the mixing bowl it goes. The only goal for my initial mix is to combine everything, and for that I use my paddle attachment. I start out slow to prevent a flour bomb, and then I blast that little puppy on high speed, and it quickly comes together and cleans the side of the bowl. Once it's mixed together, turn it off, and since there's no gluten developed yet, it's not very sticky and it just slides right off the paddle. A quick rinse, and you don't have to worry about spending 5 minutes picking dough off your hands. Now we're gonna rest this, and it's absolutely not optional. This is when the water and proteins in the flour are coming together, forming gluten, and the longer that process happens, the better. After an hour or so, I put my dough hook on and start kneading. I knead in about 2-minute increments and do 3 sets of them. My general method is to start slow and then increase the speed so the dough pulls off the side of the bowl, and then I rest it so the gluten can reform. By giving the dough time to rest in between kneadings, I've found that the dough develops much quicker in the beginning and becomes stronger before the salt gets added. When you're mixing with a dough hook, a lot of times the dough will rise up the hook, and the high speed helps fling it off, which is the real reason why I do this. I also do this probably KitchenAid unapproved move where I raise the head up a little bit while it's running, and it helps keep the dough moving around and pulls the bottom up so that you're actually mixing the dough rather than just having the hook spin around the dough inside. Once I'm done, I immediately add in 12 grams of salt, sprinkled around, not just plopped in one area, then in with 25 grams of water, which brings the total water amount to 410 grams or 82% hydration. Let this sit for 15 minutes so the dough can rest and the salt can start to dissolve. After 15 minutes, flip on your mixer and the dough is going to be a sloshy mess. Just leave it on and let it do its thing for a few minutes. Eventually the water is going to soak back in the dough and it's going to all come back together. I like to make sure the salt is evenly distributed, so I mix it doing my weird head bobbing method thing to make sure it's homogenized. I'm not trying to do anything other than mix in the salt during this phase. Once it comes back together, I like to rest it one more time, and then I'll mix it into a clear baking dish for bulk fermentation. Switching to a clear baking dish was one of the biggest improvements to my baking. The clear bottom lets me see how the dough is fermenting, and I can see exactly when I want it to be done. Huge advantage versus a bowl. For bulk fermentation, we're doing 3 folds every 45 minutes and then assess where we are. There's no way to tell you exactly what you should do because literally every single situation is different. Different starters, different room temperatures, different flours, all those have impacts on fermentation. This is why I love the glass bottom, because you can see when it's starting to really ramp up. Your goal should be 4 to 5 folds spread out between 4 to 6 hours. Those are good guidelines for you to run with, and I like to do more folds in the beginning versus the end, because at the end, the fermentation is really starting to get active and you want to preserve all that gas and texture that's inside the dough. This is the final fold, and you can see how much it's risen and that's much firmer. We want to keep all that gas in there, so be very, very gentle. The final fold is when I also pull it out onto a well-floured surface for a bench rest before final shaping. You can tidy it up a little bit to get it to a nice plump round. I've gotten in the habit of letting this chill on the cutting board for a little longer than what most people say, like up to 30 minutes, because it lets it ferment more, and as it flattens out, it's one last opportunity for the yeast to create more gas while simultaneously stretching the gluten one last time. At this phase, flour is going to be your friend because it's sticking to something is almost certain death for a good loaf. And now it's time to shape. I always come back to this simple method of shaping because it's so simple. Being gentle, kind of work your dough into a loose circle and then fold the bottom up about 60%. Then fold the right side over, then the left side, and then top down to close it up. Then you can kind of roll the dough so the seam is on the bottom. Use the bench scraper to tighten it up and then into a well-floured basket. If your basket or towel is new, then I highly recommend using rice flour or a combination of rice flour and regular flour. There is nothing that will ruin your day faster than trying to get your dough out of your basket and having it stick. Now this is going in the fridge, so I cover it with a little bit of plastic wrap to prevent it from drying out, and then into the fridge it goes for an overnight final proof. The benefit to an overnight final proof is that it slows down fermentation and gives you a much longer window to bake the next day. I'm busy, you're busy, plans change, and flexibility is really nice. Preheat your oven to a toasty 465 with your Dutch oven in there for at least 30 minutes. That's 30 minutes once against the temp. No cheating here. Pull out your extremely hot Dutch oven and the dough comes straight out of the fridge. Some people will empty it out onto parchment paper and then drop the parchment paper in, but for me, the thrill of potentially burning yourself on the edge of a 450-degree metal pot is just too enticing to pass up. And besides, the parchment paper method is cheating. You have to earn your stripes by accidentally tossing your bread into the side of the pot and ruining the last 24 hours of work at least a couple times. Square your bread using a safety razor about 1/4 of an inch deep, and then into the oven it goes. Once it's in, I turn the oven off for the first 25 minutes of the bake. This was another game changer for my bread. After 25 minutes, turn the oven back on to 465, pop the lid off, and finish the bake. It usually takes about 15 minutes to finish. You should really know your oven and know its hot spots and how each heating element works. For me, the bottom one is very hot, and I usually burn the bottom of the bread unless I put something underneath the pot. So I have some folded up tinfoil that I place on the wire rack under my pot as it finishes. Once it's baked to your desired color, pull it out and let it cool on a wired rack for at least 30 minutes, but honestly, the longer you can wait, the better. I try and prop it up to let it cool, and then it's time to cut into that puppy. Now, hopefully here you're not expecting some incredible ASMR crust crunching sounds. They were definitely there, but my kids were blasting Bluey in the background, so I need to spare you the almost erotic and alluring sounds of hot crackling crust that were ruined by Bandit and Chili arguing over Bingo's bad grade. This is the crumb that I want. It's amazing for eating alone, hearty enough for a stew, and has perfect texture for sandwiches. I don't really want bread that's so open that the butter drops through it and that you can't put jelly on. These methods are foolproof, where you can make mistakes throughout the process and still get amazing, fresh, fermented bread while not making a mess. I really hope you got something out of this. If you learned something or have a comment, drop it below. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.